Park Do-hwan stood alone at the center of the grand chamber. The room was enormous, built in a wide circle with hundreds of seats rising up like a stadium. Representatives from over 60 species filled those seats, their strange faces lit by the soft blue glow of floating holoscreens. Some had scales, some had feathers, some had no faces at all. Do-hwan was the only human in the room, and he had never felt it more than he did today. He held a thin datapad in his hand. On it was a speech he had spent 3 weeks writing. It listed everything humanity had done for the Galactic Council in the 14 years since Earth had been invited to join. The relay stations they had built, the plagues they had cured, the borders they had defended, the lives they had saved. It was not a short list. He had barely reached the second page when a sharp clicking sound cut through the chamber. It came from the high seat at the top of the room, where Prime Speaker Dorath sat behind a curved desk made of black stone. Dorath was tall and thin, with a hard shell covering most of his body, and 2 large dark eyes that never seemed to blink. He was the leader of the Velthari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy, and he ran the council the way a king runs a court. Ambassador Do-hwan, Dorath said, his voice flat and dry, "We have heard enough. The council appreciates the contributions of your species, but let us not pretend they are irreplaceable. You are a young civilization. You have been part of this body for barely a moment in galactic time. A little humility would serve you well." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Not all of it, but enough. High Cleric Omun, the spiritual leader of the Pelori, leaned forward in his seat and added, "Indeed, humanity should be grateful it was allowed a voice here at all. Many species waited thousands of years for that honor." Do-hwan looked down at his datapad. He had prepared for this. He had prepared counter-arguments, statistics, projections. He had practiced staying calm. But something in him shifted in that moment, not toward anger, but toward a kind of deep, tired clarity. He had stood in this chamber dozens of times. He had smiled through insults. He had negotiated from a position of generosity. And every single time, the answer had been the same. You are young, you are small, be quiet, and be thankful. He turned off his datapad. The screen went dark. He looked up at Dorath, then slowly let his gaze move across the chamber. He looked at Omun, who was still smiling. He looked at Trade Baron Fenwick, a heavy, well-dressed creature from the Mulvari system, who watched everything with the cold eyes of a man counting coins. He looked at Ambassador Lysick from the Rithani Collective, one of the few who had ever shown humanity any respect. Lysick's expression was unreadable, but his clawed hands were tight on the edge of his desk. Do-hwan bowed once to the chamber. It was a deep, respectful bow, the kind a man gives when he is leaving a place he does not plan to return to. "Then we have nothing further to discuss," he said. He turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed in the silence. No one called after him. No one tried to stop him. The great doors of the chamber closed behind him with a low hum, and then he was gone. Back on Earth, the message arrived within the hour. Secretary General Kwon Ji-hak read it in his office overlooking the Pacific. The window behind him showed a calm ocean under a gray sky. He read the message twice, set it down, and called an emergency meeting. They gathered in a secure room deep beneath the capital. Admiral Yoon Nari arrived first, still in her fleet uniform, her dark hair pulled back tight. She had commanded Earth's military forces in space for 6 years, and had fought in more battles than most Council species had seen in a century. She sat down without a word and waited. Han Somi arrived next. She was the director of the Human Aid and Relief Corps, a tall woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She had spent the last decade running medical missions on alien worlds, saving lives that no one else would save. She already knew what this meeting was about. She had seen the signs for months. Shin Taeho joined last, appearing on screen from a deep space relay station at the edge of known space. He was the chief engineer of humanity's vast communication network, a web of over 400 beacons that kept galactic trade and information flowing. He looked tired, but alert. Jihak stood at the head of the table and told them what had happened at the council. He played Dohwan's recording of the session. They listened in silence. When it ended, Nari's jaw was tight. Somi closed her eyes for a long moment. Teho simply stared at the screen. "I need a vote," Jihak said. "Directive 0. Full withdrawal from all galactic affairs. Military, medical, infrastructure, trade, diplomacy, everything. We leave quietly, we leave completely, and we do not explain ourselves." Nari voted yes without hesitation. Somi paused, then nodded. Teho said yes from his station in the stars. Jihak signed the order with a steady hand. There was no ceremony, no broadcast, no angry speeches sent to the galactic networks. Directive 0 was transmitted on secure channels to every human outpost, ship, station, and embassy in the galaxy. The message was simple: come home. That night, aboard his relay station, Shin Teho sat alone in the control room. The walls around him were covered in screens showing the status of hundreds of beacons, each one a small light in the dark. He stared at them for a long time. He had built most of this network with his own hands. It had taken years. It had connected worlds that had never been able to talk to each other before. He had been proud of it. He reached forward and entered the first shutdown code. A light on the far edge of the map blinked once and went dark. Then another. Then another. Teho leaned back in his chair and watched the lights go out, one by one, like stars disappearing at the end of the universe. Somewhere out in the galaxy, no one noticed. The first to notice were the patients. On a dusty, war-torn world called Verath 3, a young Pelori child woke up one morning and walked to the medical tent where the human doctors worked. The tent was still there. The beds were still there. Neatly folded blankets, sealed containers of medicine, clean bandages stacked in rows. But the doctors were gone. Every single one of them. The child stood in the empty tent and called out, but no one answered. The wind moved through the open flaps, and that was all. Han Somi had made sure of it. She had ordered her teams to leave behind enough supplies to last 60 days. She had written care instructions in the local languages and left them on every table. She had told her people to clean everything, organize everything, and leave without waking anyone. They did exactly that. On 3 different worlds, in 12 different camps, human aid workers packed their personal bags in the dark and walked to their shuttles. Most of them did not look back. Somi herself was the last to leave Verath 3. She stood at the edge of the camp as the sun came up and looked at the rows of tents she had helped build. She had spent 4 years here. She knew the names of the children. She knew which elders needed which medicine at which hour. Leaving felt like pulling a thread from her own chest. But the order had come, and she understood why. She boarded her shuttle and flew home. Across the galaxy, the withdrawal continued in silence. Admiral Yu Nari ran the military recall with the same precision she used in battle. Her orders were clear. Leave your posts. Return all borrowed equipment. Do not damage anything. Do not argue with anyone. Do not explain. 14 carrier groups pulled out of Allied defense zones in a single night. 62 border stations powered down and sealed their doors. Thousands of human soldiers and officers who had been embedded in alien fleets simply left. Some of their alien comrades woke up to find the bunk next to them empty, the locker cleaned out, and a short handwritten note that said only, "It was an honor to serve beside you." One Rathani captain later said it was the most unsettling thing he had ever experienced. Not because the humans were angry, because they were not. Shin Teho continued his work in the deep black. The Pathway Relay Network, humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, was a system of over 400 FTL communication beacons spread across Council space. Before humans built it, sending a message from one side of the galaxy to the other took weeks. After, it took seconds. Trade depended on it. Military coordination depended on it. Emergency response depended on it, and it belonged entirely to humanity. Tejo did not shut it down all at once. That would have been cruel, and that was not the point. Instead, he did it sector by sector, starting with the outermost relays and working inward. Each day, a few more lights went dark on his map. Each day, a few more systems lost their fast connection to the rest of the galaxy. It was like watching a river slowly dry up. At first, no one noticed. Then the ground began to crack. On Kefari Station, where the Galactic Council made its home, Ambassador Lysick of the Rethani Collective was the first official to realize what was happening. He had gone to the human embassy to deliver a personal message to Dawan, a quiet apology for what had happened in the chamber. When he arrived, the embassy was empty, not abandoned, not trashed, cleaned. Every desk cleared, every file removed, every decorative plant taken. The walls were bare, the lights were off. Only the metal bracket where the Earth flag had once hung remained, 2 small holes in the wall where the screws had been. Lysick stood in the empty room for a long time. He reached out and touched the wall where the flag had been. Then he turned and walked to the council chamber to sound the alarm. Prime Speaker Dorath listened to Lysick's report with his usual calm. He clicked his mandibles twice, a sign of mild annoyance, and waved one thin hand. "Let them go," he said. "They are a dramatic species. They will come back when they realize how much they need the Council's resources and protection. Give it a month." Trade Baron Fenwick said nothing during the meeting, but afterward he returned to his private office and pulled up every trade record involving human goods and services. He ran the numbers 3 times. Each time, the result was the same. Humans accounted for nearly 30% of the raw material transport through the inner systems. Their engineering contracts supported the infrastructure of dozens of worlds. Their medical patents were used in hospitals on every inhabited planet in Council space. Fenwick stared at his screen and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Doubt. But he said nothing. Not yet. The market had not reacted yet. The public did not know yet. There was still time to make arrangements to protect his own investments. That was how Fenwick thought, not in terms of right and wrong, but in terms of profit and loss. Out on the far trade routes, a civilian freighter captain from the Rethani Collective dropped out of faster-than-light travel near a human trade port on the edge of the Denori system. He had made this run 100 times. He knew the controllers by name. He opened his communication channel and hailed the port. There was no answer. He tried again. Static. He adjusted his frequency and tried a 3rd time. Nothing. He pulled up his navigation display and looked at the port on his long-range scanner. The station was dark. No lights, no energy signatures, no docking beacons. It floated in the black like an empty shell. The captain sat in his cockpit and stared at the dead station for a long time. Then he turned his ship around and headed back the way he came, a sick feeling growing in his stomach that he could not quite name. It was not fear. It was the beginning of understanding. The humans were not coming back. 3 months after the humans left, the galaxy began to break. It started with the communications. The Pathway Relay Network was now fully offline. Every single beacon Shin Tejo had built and maintained over the years was dark. The effect was immediate and devastating. Messages that once took seconds to cross the galaxy now took days using the old pre-human relay systems, and some of those old systems had not been maintained in over a decade. They failed constantly. Trade agreements that required real-time confirmation collapsed overnight. Supply shipments that relied on coordinated timing went to the wrong systems or arrived weeks late. On the colony world of Nithara Prime, a food shipment meant for 40,000 people was redirected to the wrong sector and sat in orbit around an uninhabited moon for 11 days before anyone figured out what had happened. By the time the food arrived, 600 people had starved. The council blamed a technical failure. They did not mention the humans. The second blow came from the borders. For 10 years, the Drenari Raiders, a loose coalition of pirate clans that lived in the lawless space beyond council territory, had been kept in check almost entirely by human forces. Admiral Yunari had personally designed the defensive grid that held them back. Human ships patrolled the border. Human officers trained allied crews in combat tactics. Human intelligence networks tracked raider movements across dozens of systems. All of it was gone now. The Drenari noticed within weeks. Their scouts pushed into border space and found empty stations, cold engines, and silence. Within 2 months, the raids began. 3 outer systems were hit in a single coordinated attack. The Council fleet, which had not fought a real battle without human support in years, responded slowly and clumsily. They sent a task force of 60 ships to meet a raider fleet of 40. They lost 22 ships in the first engagement. The Drenari lost 3. The news spread quickly, despite the broken communication lines. Fear followed it. Colony worlds near the border began demanding protection. The Council had no protection to give. Their fleet was stretched thin, their coordination was shattered, and the officers who had once worked alongside humans suddenly realized how much they had depended on human planning, human instincts, and human willingness to fight in the front line. Admiral Yunari heard about the border defeats from her office on Earth. She read the reports quietly, set them down, and said nothing. She had warned the Council about the Drenari 5 years ago. She had presented a detailed plan for a permanent defense network that would have secured the border for a generation. The Council had voted it down. Too expensive, they said. Too much power in human hands, they said. She felt tired. The third crisis was the worst because it was slow. On the Pelori homeworld, a disease called the Vethis Plague had been under control for years. Held back by a treatment that human scientists had developed and distributed for free. The treatment required regular doses of a compound that only human laboratories could produce in large quantities. When the humans left, they took their laboratories with them. The remaining stockpiles lasted 2 months. After that, the plague came back. It started in the outer provinces, where the poorest Pelori lived. Fever, bleeding, organ failure. The old death returning as if it had never left. Hospitals that had been half-empty for years were suddenly overflowing. Doctors who had forgotten how to treat the plague scrambled to remember protocols they had not used in a decade. Many of them failed. High Cleric Oman, who had once laughed at the humans in the council chamber, was forced to go before the galactic media and beg for help. His voice cracked as he spoke. His hands trembled. He asked any species with medical resources to send aid to the Pelori homeworld. A few did. It was not enough. Someone in the press asked Oman if he regretted how the council had treated humanity. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away from the podium without answering. Ambassador Lysick pushed hard for an emergency council session. He wanted to authorize a formal outreach to Earth, a request for negotiation, a beginning of dialogue. Dorath blocked it. "We do not beg," the Prime Speaker said, "especially not from children who abandoned their responsibilities." Lysick stared at him. "They did not abandon their responsibilities," he said quietly. "We told them their responsibilities did not matter. They believed us." Dorath dismissed him. Behind closed doors, Trade Baron Fenwick tried a different approach. He sent private envoys to the outer edges of human space, merchants with no official council connection, carrying offers of exclusive trade deals and generous terms. Fenwick was not interested in apologies or diplomacy. He wanted to secure his supply chains before the market collapsed entirely. The envoys reached the human border and were met by a single automated buoy. It broadcast a short message on repeat. The voice belonged to Admiral Yoon Nari, calm and professional as always. Humanity is not currently accepting diplomatic or commercial contact. Please redirect all inquiries to the Galactic Council. Thank you. The envoys tried different frequencies. They tried different routes. They even tried physically crossing the border. Each time they were turned back by patrol ships that appeared out of nowhere, silent and efficient. The human border was sealed. Fenwick received the report and sat in his office for a very long time. He was used to dealing with people who could be bought. He was used to finding the crack in every wall, the price behind every refusal. But there was no crack here, no price. The humans were not negotiating. They were not posturing. They were simply done. On Earth, life went on. Park Do-hwan spent his mornings walking along the coast near his home, watching the waves come in. Han Somi was building new clinics in the rural regions of South America and Southeast Asia, turning her skills toward Earth's own forgotten communities. Shin Taeho was already designing a second-generation relay network, faster and more secure than the first, built exclusively for human use. Secretary General Jihak held regular briefings with his cabinet, not about the council, but about Earth's future. No one on Earth was celebrating. No one was gloating. No one was watching the council's collapse with pleasure. That was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. The humans were not punishing the galaxy. They had simply stopped carrying it. 9 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council was falling apart from the inside. 3 member species had formally filed charges against the Council leadership, blaming Dorath and his allies for what they called the greatest diplomatic failure in modern galactic history. 2 other species had quietly sent their own secret messages to Earth, trying to open back channels without Council knowledge. All of them were met with the same polite, automated refusal. Humanity was not interested in side deals. If the galaxy wanted to talk, it would have to come as one voice, and it would have to mean it. Dorath felt the ground shifting under him, so he did what powerful men always do when they are losing control. In a widely broadcast address, he stood before the council and spoke in his sharp, dry voice about humanity's betrayal. He called their withdrawal an act of abandonment, a selfish decision by a young species that had no sense of duty or loyalty. He said that humanity had revealed its true nature, unreliable, emotional, and unfit for galactic leadership. He urged the council to move forward without them, to rebuild what the humans had broken by leaving. It worked on some. Fear is a powerful tool, and many species were afraid. The Drennery raids were getting worse. The economy was still in freefall. People wanted someone to blame, and Dorath gave them a target. For a few weeks, anti-human sentiment rose across parts of Council space. Protests were held on some worlds. Human cultural centers that had been left behind were vandalized. But it did not work on everyone. Ambassador Lysick, of the Rathani Collective, requested the floor during the next full council session. Dorath tried to deny him, but the procedural rules were clear, and Lysick had filed his request properly. He could not be refused. Lysick walked to the center of the Grand Chamber, the same spot where Park Do-hwan had stood 9 months ago. He was a quiet figure, shorter than most of his species, with pale green scales and calm golden eyes. He was not known for dramatic speeches. He was known for listening. That was what made it so powerful when he finally spoke. He began by reading a list. It was a simple list, just numbers. The number of relay beacons humans had built. The number of border systems they had defended. The number of plague outbreaks they had stopped. The number of colony worlds they had fed during the Nathara famine 7 years ago. the number of council species that had voted against giving humans equal representation, the number of times human proposals had been dismissed without debate, the number of times human ambassadors had been interrupted, mocked, or ignored in this very chamber. The numbers filled the room like stones dropped into still water. Then Lissik did something no one expected. He pulled out a copy of Park Do-hwan's final speech, the one that Dorath had interrupted. He read it in full. It took nearly 10 minutes. It was a detailed, respectful, carefully worded appeal for fairness, not for power, not for dominance, just for the basic dignity of being heard. The last line of the speech, the one Do-hwan never got to say, read, "We do not ask to lead. We only ask to walk beside you as equals." If that is too much, then perhaps we have been walking in the wrong direction. The chamber was completely silent when Lissik finished. He folded the paper, placed it on the podium, and returned to his seat without another word. Dorath said nothing. For the first time he had no response. 2 weeks later, the Drenari launched their boldest attack yet, a strike at the Korvathi system, a core world with 3 billion inhabitants. The Council fleet mobilized everything it had. 140 ships formed a defensive line around the system. The Drenari came with 90. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Council fleet held the line but barely. They lost 51 ships. 30,000 crew members died. The Drenari were pushed back but not broken. They retreated into deep space, and everyone knew they would come again. It was the Council's worst military defeat in over 200 years, and it happened in the heart of their own territory. That night the Council voted. Over Dorath's furious objections, they passed a resolution to send a formal delegation to Earth. The vote was not even close. Only Dorath and 4 of his closest allies voted against it. The delegation was led by Lissik. High Cleric Omun asked to join, and after some debate, he was allowed. He had changed in the months since the plague returned. His robes hung looser on his thin frame. His eyes, once proud and sharp, were heavy with something that looked like grief. They traveled to the edge of human space in a small diplomatic vessel. When they arrived, they were told to hold position and wait. A human patrol ship scanned them, confirmed their identity, and told them a meeting would be arranged. It took 4 days. During those 4 days, the delegation watched through their windows as human ships moved through the space around them. New stations were being built. Cargo vessels moved in neat lines between systems. A massive construction platform hung in the distance, surrounded by thousands of workers, assembling something enormous. The humans had not spent the last 9 months mourning their departure from the Council. New trade routes with non-Council species, new alliances, new infrastructure. They had not just survived without the galaxy, they had grown. When the meeting finally came, it was held on a small station in neutral space. Secretary General Kwon Ji-hak sat on one side of a plain table. Park Do-hwan sat beside him, called out of retirement as a gesture of respect. Lissik and Omun sat on the other side. The conversation was polite, it was measured, and it was devastating in its calmness. Lissik spoke first. He apologized, not in the vague, political way that leaders often apologize, but directly and specifically. He named what the Council had done wrong. He took responsibility for his own silence over the years. He asked what it would take to begin again. Ji-hak listened carefully. When Lissik finished, Ji-hak nodded once and said, "We did not leave to punish you. We left because staying was costing us more than we were willing to pay." Not in resources, but in dignity. Do-hwan, who had been quiet the entire time, added, "You are welcome to submit a formal petition for renewed relations. It will be reviewed in due course." Omun, sitting beside Lissik, lowered his head. His hands shook. A single tear ran down his lined face, not for politics, not for power, but for the memory of laughing in a chamber while a good man tried to speak. The delegation was escorted back to their ship. The meeting had lasted less than an hour. No deals were made, no promises were given. Only a door, left slightly open, for someone brave enough to walk through it. It took the Galactic Council 3 more months to remove Dorath from power. The vote happened on a cold, quiet morning aboard Kefari Station. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. The motion was read aloud, the votes were cast, and Dorath lost by a margin so wide that it erased any doubt about where the galaxy stood. He sat in his high seat as the numbers were announced, his dark eyes unblinking, his thin hands folded on the desk in front of him. When it was over, he stood, said nothing, and walked out of the chamber for the last time. He returned to the Velthari homeworld and disappeared from public life. Years later, when journalists tried to interview him, he still insisted he had done nothing wrong. He said the humans were too sensitive. He said the galaxy would have been fine without them. He said these things alone in a quiet room, and no one was listening. Ambassador Lysick was elected the new head speaker of the council, not because he was the loudest voice or the most powerful, but because he was the one who had told the truth when it mattered. His first act was to form a committee to draft what he called the Petition of Renewed Partnership, a formal request to humanity to re-engage with galactic society. But Lysick understood that a piece of paper alone meant nothing. It had to contain real change. The drafting process took weeks. Every line was debated. Lysick insisted that the petition include 3 things that the old council would never have allowed. First, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, written in plain language and broadcast across every galactic network. Second, a complete restructuring of voting rights within the council, so that no species would ever again be treated as lesser because of its age or size. Third, a guarantee of fair compensation for shared technologies, so that no species could ever again be forced to give away its work for nothing. There were objections, of course. Some species thought the acknowledgement went too far. Others thought the reforms were unnecessary. Trade Baron Fenwick argued that the economic terms were too generous to humanity. But Lysick held firm. He told the chamber, if we are not willing to change, then we are not serious about getting them back. And if we are not serious, then we deserve what comes next. The petition passed with a strong majority. It was delivered to Earth on a spring morning. Secretary General Quan Jihak received it in his office. He read it slowly, then passed it to his cabinet. Admiral Yoon Nari read it with her arms crossed and her face unreadable. When she finished, she set it down and said, "It is a good start. That is all it is." She had seen too many promises broken by too many governments, human and alien alike. Han Somi read it differently. She saw the clause about medical cooperation and thought about the children on Verath 3. She thought about the Pelori dying from a plague that humans knew how to stop. She said, we can help them again, but only if they let us help as partners, not as servants. Shin Taeho, connected from his new relay station in the outer solar system, looked at the technical sections and nodded slowly. Their systems are still broken, he said. It would take them decades to rebuild what we built. We could help, but our own network comes first. Jihak listened to all of them. Then he called Park Do-won. Do-won was at home on the coast, as he usually was these days. He had a small garden, he read books, he watched the sea. He had not followed the news from the council closely, but he was not surprised when Jihak called. He had always known this moment would come. The only question was whether it would come with real change or with empty words. Jihak read him the key sections of the petition. Do-hwan listened without interrupting. When Jihak finished, he asked, "What do you think?" Do-hwan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, People only value what they have lost. Now they know what we were worth. That is enough." He paused. "Open the door, but do not walk through it all the way. Let them show us they mean it." Jihak agreed. He drafted a formal response, accepting limited diplomatic re-engagement. Not a full return, not a restoration of the old arrangement. A beginning, a test. Humanity would send a small delegation to the Council to observe, to listen, and to decide whether the galaxy had truly changed or whether it was just afraid. The delegation was small, just 5 people and a staff of 20. At its head was a young woman named Beck Yuna. She was 31 years old, a career diplomat who had served as Dowan's aide during his final years at the Council. She had been in the chamber the day he walked out. She had carried his bag to the shuttle. She had not cried then, but she had cried later, alone in her quarters, because she had believed in the work, and the work had been thrown away. Now she was going back. Her shuttle docked at Kefari Station on a bright artificial morning. The corridors were quieter than she remembered. The station felt older, more worn. She passed the spot where the human embassy had been, and saw that it was still empty. No one had moved into it. The bare wall where the flag mount had been was untouched, the 2 small screw holes still visible. She walked into the grand chamber. It was the same enormous room, the same rising seats, the same floating holoscreens. But the atmosphere was different, quieter. The faces looking down at her were not mocking. They were waiting. Lysick stood at the high seat and welcomed her. His voice was warm and steady. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome humanity back to this chamber. We are grateful for your presence." Yuna looked around the room. She saw Oman, thinner now, his eyes red but clear. She saw Fenwick sitting very still, his face carefully blank. She saw dozens of species she had studied, worked with, and believed in. She saw the empty space where Dorath used to sit. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small clay pot with a green plant growing inside it. It was a seedling from a Korean pine tree, grown from a seed that Dohan had given her the day she left Earth. She placed it on the desk in front of her. It was a tradition in their delegation, a sign of intent to grow something, to stay and build and see what comes. She looked up at the chamber and spoke. Her voice was clear and calm, carrying easily through the vast room. "Not because we need to be, but because we choose to be. We hope this time that choice will be mutual." The chamber was silent. Yuna stood still, her hand resting beside the small green plant, and waited. Then Lysick rose from his seat. He placed one clawed hand over his chest, the Rathani gesture of deep respect. Beside him, Omun stood slowly, his old body unsteady, but his eyes fixed on the young woman at the center of the room. Then another delegate stood, then another, then another. One by one, across the chamber, representatives of 60 species rose from their seats. Not because protocol required it, not because anyone told them to, but because for the first time in a very long time, they understood what it meant to stand for someone. Yuna watched them rise. She thought of Dowan, sitting by the sea with his garden and his books. She thought of Nari, still watching the borders with sharp eyes. She thought of Somi, building clinics in the mountains. She thought of Teho, alone among the stars, turning lights on one by one. She did not smile. She did not cry. She simply nodded once, the way Dowan had taught her, with dignity and with grace. And she sat down to begin the work of building something new. Outside the station, the galaxy turned slowly in the dark, broken in places, healing in others, and somewhere at the edge of human space, a single relay beacon powered on, its lights steady and small against the black, like a hand reaching out across the void, waiting to see if anyone would reach back.